So I would like the moderators of each of the groups to start moving forward. I realize that some of you are scrambling to figure out what you want to say, but if anybody is even vaguely ready, can you please come up? And we won't do it by any order, we'll do it by level of preparation. So please start coming up, and as you come up, you can take the seats and pretend to be Larry Susskind, Edward Clerico, etc. And we'll move you through. Yeah. Looks like Sean's ready. Okay, wonderful. Yay.
I know we'll be here all day, right? Yeah. Okay.
So what I'm going to propose is that as people come up and line up here, please start talking. We won't wait for everyone to be ready. This way is efficient, and we'll get going. So Sean Wiggins from General Electric Corporation is numero uno. Let's go with it.
Okay. I was with a group of investors, and I learned a lot of great investment talk over there. So thank you guys for that. We were looking at the best way or possibilities to make investment a little bit more attractive with the current problem. I asked for 5, and they gave me about 15 or so. So bear with us here. Now, some of these, obviously they're very controversial. They're good points and bad points, but we're just going to go through these in the interest of time because you'll be here till tomorrow. So, first thing we talked about, I think it was mentioned earlier, is communicate successes. There are successes out there that are happening. People in the investment world who aren't really following this space, they need to know about them. That would help to increase a lot of investment. And again, keep in mind that there are different levels or different sizes of investment. Many of the successes we talked about weren't that large, but they're working. So it's a matter of just, maybe looking at it from the collective. P3, very successful examples, but many of them are very local and specific. So maybe look at more public-private partnerships. Let them be a bit more local and specific, and we might, have a bit more success there as well too. Performance contracts with shared incentives. And again, if you guys have any questions, I've got my team backing me up here to dig a bit deeper in here. Number 4, we came up with greater uniformity. Now, this popped up in various ways throughout the conversation because the term that came out was scattered. It's very difficult for any investor because if you think you're an investor, your banker is not going to jump in and give you a loan if there's an uncertain future in that person or that entity getting their money back. So I think that might collapse about 5 or 6 of these under here, but I'll still read them out. And I won't go into too much detail because I think I'm taking up enough time as it is. Structure is a big issue, and I think that goes back to uniformity as well, too. We need to look at setting up a mechanism where investors can know what their returns will be. And again, that's common sense. We had one crazy idea. This might get a little reaction from you. But how about we combine all 50,000 utilities into 1 or 50? Okay. All right. Number 7, have investors combine funds to conduct investments, sort of like crowdsourcing. And again, we're sort of thinking out of the box here. This isn't new overall, but in this space, it is. So something to think about moving forward. Let's see. Number 8, regulation. And again, this goes back to uniformity, such that will incentivize investments or have baked in recapture costs regardless of trends. And again, that gives a sense of security for any investor. Number 10, change incentives for municipalities. Again, good and bad in there as well, too. 11, with the great crew change, and what that means, I think that's something that's not just being experienced in this industry, but in many industries, in the energy industry. You have an aging workforce. You've got a huge gap for the replacement. So with that great crew change, again, that's a significant amount of uncertainty. You've got the great crew change happening, and then you also have... bear with me a second here. You have municipalities not wanting to lose control with that loss of expertise. So the idea is to maybe open up a bit more privatization to have the utilities marry the expertise, and that might be private industry as well too. So number 12, again, going back to uniformity, have legal contracts with certainty around the bid process. 13, municipal bonds. We had a really interesting conversation here. If you talk about municipal bonds, you're looking at about 30 to 40 years. You look at the equipment in this space, about 30 to 40 years. What can we do to marry those two together to make it a bit more attractive for investments in the space as well, too? And actually, I think I went through them all. That's it.
All right, so I'll take up that with topic area 1 with an engineering or equipment or supply focus.
Maybe you guys announce who you are.
Sure. So my name is Chad Seidel with Corona Environmental Consulting, and then also the University of Colorado at Boulder. Probably had more of the university hat on in this dialogue. And so we did try to focus in our conversation around some of the questions that were posed in the moderator discussion materials. But I think we'll sum up the challenge of needing to address some of the current challenges, being water supply, water quality, and really response to scarcity issues in some cases. While in many ways those may be solvable by advances in technology, they're often more so limited now by other just societal hurdles, whether it be governance or policy or public education and acceptance. Just hurdles that get in the way of using existing solutions that just aren't being put in place. People don't have the technical, managerial, financial capacity to implement those things. So I certainly was on my soapbox for that. We did talk about the need to simplify and speed up technology verification for water-related technologies in all spaces, really, and how that is presenting challenges for providers in getting into that market space. One of the governance issues that we talked a little bit about is water reuse, in that the policy framework is lagging behind and needs to catch up in some way of combining Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act aspects, because states are being left in the gap to have to do that on their own right now, which is taking them time and efforts that are often difficult to solve in the lack of having that federal guidance there. And then we had just some of the realities of what are going to be the drivers for this. I tried to summarize the thoughts of our group in saying that scarcity, which frankly could probably just be replaced by crisis, drives change. Doesn't matter what drives the crisis, but it drives the change. And that's what is usually the tipping point to address those technology, policy, willingness to pay issues related to those initial structures that are oftentimes more the challenge than the technology in the first place. Ed gave the example of Singapore being a great place that has tons of building water reuse, and they have it because they don't have a choice. So the bigger question that comes after that then is do we have to wait until the crisis hits to be able to do this? And what might be the benefits of trying to get the public will to have it happen before the crisis hits, so we're better prepared, can do so more effectively and efficiently, and hopefully not disengage stakeholders that are not going to be well represented in a crisis-driven process. There were a couple other things at the very end of that I think were important, and that is we always have this potential of leaving those at the bottom behind or most impacted. You know, if the costs of water become prohibitive for disadvantaged members of the community, then we got to figure out a way to address that. That's obviously a very high-level societal question, but we didn't come up with a good answer for that yet, but certainly leave it in the hands of good researchers to answer those questions. Did I miss any other key highlights that you wanted to touch on? Hopefully that frames it up, and thanks to Alicia for scribing for us and getting these down for y'all. Questions? Next.
Let's go through the whole round.
Okay, my name is Adam Carpenter. I'm with the American Water Works Association, and we talked about a number of different questions, and the answer is it's complicated. All kidding aside, we talked through a series of 4 questions. We had more than that, but time limited. Only able to get really address 4 with any real depth. And we came to 5 general conclusions that we think could be helpful in framing the future discussion. So the first is that there is an opportunity for long-term reengineering of cities. So we all know that we can't start over, right? So we have existing infrastructure that has significant amounts of continued life on that infrastructure. We can't just start over, but we can adjust, right? And so the question is, moving forward, what needs to be adjusted? Where does it need to be adjusted? When does it need to be adjusted? How do you make the plan and stick to the plan? And then how do you incorporate things that can build in greater efficiencies like distributed water reuse or things like, all sorts of different things like that. Second was importance of markets. So right now, market structures prioritize certain aspects over others that are also of value but are more difficult to quantify. Markets focus mostly on the revenue stream and then what's the risk associated with it. So some things are very difficult to connect to those particular two items. For example, when you're thinking about climate resiliency, if it's a piece of infrastructure or a piece of a piece of the system that will only be used for 1 year out of every 50 or 1 year out of every 100 because of an extreme drought or an extreme flood, it's very difficult to build a revenue stream for that and make the case to get financing for it. The third one is that for pretty much every problem we discussed, and we think for most of the problems out there, there is a technical solution that already exists. Now, that's not to say that the technological solutions won't get better over time or they won't become cheaper over time, because they almost certainly will. But we have something today for pretty much all of these issues. It's just a question of what are the economics and what is the policy. So just to give an example, when you try to transition to full cost pricing, you'll often run into the issue of affordability. And so how do you balance out all those different issues? And of course, just taking that one thread, you can then spin a whole, tapestry of different issues that you had the technical solution, but now you've got all the other issues that you have to deal with. Fourth is that different sectors, and by sectors in this context, we primarily mean private sector and public sector, nonprofits, and so on and so forth. Each can bring different things to the table. And that different communities are going to find a different optimal mix of expertise and finance capability and all the different things that go into water projects, and just kind of who brings what to the table. And then finally, we transitioned over and moved away from urban water for just a moment to think about agriculture, and more or less came to the conclusion that the four things I just talked about will also apply to agriculture and to other major water users. They're not going to apply in the same way. They're not going to be exactly the same sorts of solutions. But, for example, there are technical solutions to most of the potential agricultural water problems. It's just a question, again, of economics and policy. So we were hoping to come up with some grand final statement and ran out of time. So thank you all. If there's any questions at the end, I'm happy to take them.
All right. So I'm Jimmy Yu with PepsiCo. So we talk about food and beverage industries, and that's kind of our focus. So echoed previous before, it's complicated, even for us, for food and beverage industries, because even just breaking within the industries, the food side and beverage sides look very different. Even though the beverage side will have a lot of spotlights toward on the beverage because it's more intimate with the consumers, we all know the food side actually consumes more water. But there's a little disconnect in those things. And what we're trying to do, what I was trying to push for there is to say, look, what are things we can do with other industries, maybe transfer to other industries. Well, the story actually get quite a bit complicated because the industries look very different from one another. And even the supply chain issues. Our supply chain tend to be a little bit more fragmented than the others, other industries and other suppliers. And therefore, what we think about is we need to strengthen, what we think can help out is really strengthen the collaborations within the industries, and then that the other industries we can see where we can collaborate, learn from each other. But the collaboration between within the industries is probably the most important within the sectors itself. The other one is we talk about the main message we have is, we talk about the price of water, the cost of water, the value of water. Unfortunately, for food and beverage industries, we still, in this reality, we still function in the price of water. That's where we are still practicing. So we need the entire ecosystem to change. It's very unlikely for industries to come up to be the first one to change toward the value of water rather than doing the price of water. So there are a lot of great technologies out there that can do. There are a lot of collaborations within industries that can work on, but we don't work in the vacuum. So even we build plants, even we want different plants collaborating with one another, or different plants with different industries collaborating, we still need the municipalities to be there. We still need the local government to be there. We still need all the federal government, everybody else within those realms to work together, and then we can come up with a solution. But currently, that ecosystem is not there. Therefore, it's very difficult for the food and beverage industry to kind of lead in that, even though that's a great future. That is the great paradigm to work in. But again, for us though, we really have to look at what is that we can do right now. And fortunately, we're still stuck on price. And we know that in terms of water, in terms of productivity, that's a very, very difficult thing to play in. So for us, the big picture we have is, again, we're going to continue to drive for what we do best, and we're going to make it as responsible as possible. But we really want to be in this dialogue, in the seat at the table, to really change these ecosystems. When this ecosystem changes, they will unleash quite a bit of opportunities for the entire water field.
Hi, I'm Evan Koslow from KT Corporation. Our group was looking at technology and innovation, and interestingly, it's really what the other panelists said in Redox. Even though we were looking at technology and innovation specifically, much of our conversation ultimately looked at policy and economics, that there really aren't technological solutions that aren't available. There's nothing that can't be done. Yes, there are. At the end, we said what tools would make things better, and those tools probably could be developed and make things better. But ultimately, we concluded, I think pretty much unanimously, that almost every problem, whether it's urban water, agriculture, industrial califaction of rivers, whatever you're looking at, you're pretty much looking at a policy and economic problem. Either the policy is maladroit, because basically it is not keeping up with the pace of change, so that our policy changes are not keeping up with the pace of technological and just evolutionary change of our society, or B, there's no pricing. It's not that we misprice, it's literally in many cases not priced. And under those conditions, the technologies cannot be implemented in an environment where the price is unknown. And so going into rather specifics, we looked at cities, and what was really lacking in cities and even down to the individual household is a return loop. Most of our urban systems, agricultural systems, even our industrial systems, like a paper mill, a modern paper mill, or a power plant, they're open loop. When you have an open loop system, you get an intolerable impact upon the local environment, and there's no potential to have any efficiency, technological change, nothing, because you have none of the infrastructure necessary to close the loop. Most of the technologies really are not looking at improving the access to the resource. Yeah, desalination does that. But for the most part, the most cost-effective technologies are technologies that close the loop from the resource. Here we have water resources, but we also looked at water is carrying energy in hot water from power plants. So you're trying to close the loop, and we said, well, in universities, what do they do with the water? They have hot water coming out of the local power plant in the university. What do they do with it? They send it to the dorm rooms. The dorm room is the heat exchanger. So the dorm room, uses the heat. That low-quality heat is absorbed into low-quality heating, and then what we get back, coming back to the power plant, is chilled water, which they reuse. Complete closure of the loop. We don't site power plants in a location where such suitable use of the hot water or the heat, the waste heat, could be going to urban applications or industrial applications. They're completely built and developed in isolation. So we don't look at our systems as complete systems that have to be completely closed. Instead, everything is done in isolation. We build a power plant out in that community. We build homes over here. We put industrial plants over here. There's no integration, no planning, nothing. So even though we were looking at technology innovation, we concluded almost universally, in any level that you look at, whether it's quantity or quality, whether it's agriculture, urban, industrial, you always face policy and economic problems first. Then, okay, we had to look at, there's definitely tools that could be developed to improve the situation. But I want to tell you that in my personal opinion, and I didn't really have time to close the loop with my panel, so I hope you'll forgive me. I'm going to extrapolate what we said. In most cases, the technological innovations that will emerge are one of two types. They're either technology innovations that will emerge from an unallied field, not from water, that will dramatically change our situation. I gave an example that if you put a polymer on soil, which greatly changes how water moves through soil and how crops utilize that water and change the water use efficiency, then that would have a greater impact than us playing around with irrigation. And such things have been studied. So that an innovation in soil treatment may actually have a better implication for either crop yield or water use reduction than us going out and trying more drip irrigation. Number two, there are really tools that we could really use. And there was a mention of graphene. There's many other technologies that we came up with. It could be a huge list, right? There are a lot of technologies being developed, especially in water quality, that could be very impactful. But I want you to understand that I think our committee agreed that those impacts are much less important than changing policy. Changing policy and really looking at the economics of water are going to be really the thing that make technology implementation possible. Technology in a vacuum is not going to work. We are really working in a policy and economic vacuum, and until that changes, I think our group said it's pretty hopeless.
Okay. So I was debating whether we should have a question at this point or swap this slate for another slate. If someone has a pressing question for this group, let's get it. Otherwise, let's get the next group on. Looks like you guys are on the next one.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joan Matthews, and I'm the director of the Clean Water Division for US EPA Region 2, which is New York, New Jersey, 8 Indian nations, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. So when you talk about variety and water issues, we've got them. So our group was the Policy, Water Rights, Nonprofit, and Government work group. And so I'm just going to read off some of our colleagues' items. We wrote down some brief ideas and had really, a good discussion about them. So in terms of gaps, the needs, the knowledge, the data gaps, we need models for innovative infrastructure that have been proven and are tailorable to the locality, and that they also estimate the cost savings so that you have the buy-in from the locality. We need a strategy for infrastructure that is way more flexible than it is now. We need information on agriculture, for example, subsidies, and who grows what where, and the amounts of fertilizers that are applied. And may I add pesticides. And we also need to know what water rights are where on a map, as a simple way of describing it, depicting it, with what priorities and the historic consumptive use. We need water quality data, and we spend a lot of time talking about data. We need data that is accurate, that is usable, accessible. We talked about citizen science, and the beauty of that is you connect people to their waterways. And then somebody mentioned, the EPA app. Nancy, where are you? How's my waterway doing? So that's a useful tool for people to use. We said, yes, there are data gaps, but we also need to know what to do with it. We need to put the focus on making available data and other information useful, as I said before, and using, taking it one step further, using graphical, behavioral, and other expertise, and keeping in mind the desired outcomes and relevant audiences. And that was Andrew Revkin's comment. Some of the knowledge gaps: a consumer understanding of where their water comes from. We talked about that. Some people, and this was talked about in the panels, some people just simply don't know where their water comes from, and aggregating the different water sources, data sources, of course. There's a knowledge gap when it comes to traditional versus innovative water distribution models, so we need to fill that gap. Water rights, I believe this was Larry's comment, water rights may be more malleable than people think. They're following an Australian model. You could buy water rights and then reallocate those rights under new rules, not under the old rules, which may not appreciate the needs of the resources or the needs of the users. In terms of data gaps, we need new methods of probabilistic forecasting of future water supplies to deal with climate uncertainty. And then we probably will need several scenarios to provide that information. We need gaps to fill on water infrastructure. The biggest gap, I would say, would be money. The federal government has had several grants programs, and communities are really clamoring for those programs. Is this the time for another big grants program? I don't know, but the communities are certainly asking for it. But then again, if we were to have a program like that, or if we were to have communities come into a loan program more than they are doing, do we have to reimagine the infrastructure and not have it be based on the 100-year-old model? And in terms of, as I mentioned, the citizen science. And then the final comment we had was, I'm not sure whose comment this is, so my colleagues, please speak up. Making the invisible visible. For example, is there a water quality dashboard? And the second comment of this colleague was wisdom versus science, or perhaps wisdom and science, namely the ecological, nature-based, holistic thinking versus the more machine-based, linear thinking. And how do we marry the two? How do we reconcile those two views? So thank you to my colleagues for your contributions here.
I am Nayin Yip, Columbia University. So the working group that I represent is academia. So a bunch of us from universities and also think tanks. And we didn't really start off on a central theme for a discussion, and we sort of went a lot of places. But at the end, I'll try to bring everything together and distill it down to a couple of key points. Not so much in terms of solutions to some of the discussion that we had throughout the day, but some of them are even additional questions to be asked. One of the key points that we all agreed on was agriculture water use. All right, we talked about agricultural water use being 70% of our water usage, so it's clearly the big ticket item. Should we be going after this big ticket item more than commercial water use, industrial water use, and municipal water use? A 5-10% savings or increase in water efficiency for agricultural water use will translate to a much, much larger net benefit to the overall water landscape than trying to squeeze out a bit more performance from the other water users. We should also start to ask questions like, in places of water scarcity, should we grow very profitable but non-food crops? Should we be diverting those water use for other commercial, municipal, for drinking water users? The next point that we have is on infrastructure. So we talked about the aging infrastructure in the US and the challenges faced to replace or upgrade this infrastructure. But at the same time, the developing countries, they do not carry with them this burden of the existing infrastructure. They're able to actually skip an entire generation of technology. So to give an example of telephone lines, right? So in developed countries, we have landlines laid underground so that we can have our telephones. But in a lot of developing countries, there's absolutely no such landlines being laid at all. They just skipped right to the cell phone generation. So in a way, they skipped an entire generation of infrastructure. And we think that this is an opportunity for the developing countries to actually kind of explore what kind of infrastructure. If we do not have this burden of an existing infrastructure, what kind of a system, what kind of a setup will we put in? What technology will we use that is actually reflects the best of our current knowledge, the best technology that we have, and that can be an example for the developed world. Let's see. So in terms of the studies that's been done on climate change, there's a lot of models, a lot of information that has been synthesized from all these climate change studies. How do we transpose this information and use them for water planning at various levels, at governmental level, at regional levels, at water utilities level? And then we also talked about water efficiency. It's good that we are trying to push for higher water efficiency, but we should always not lose focus of the greater purpose of the greater social purpose. Just to give some background on this, the freshwater runoff for the entire world is around 40,000 cubic kilometers. The amount that we use, the entire world population is only around roughly 10% of that. So there's definitely enough water to go around. The question then, of course, is distribution. All right. So while we are going for higher efficiency, we should not lose sight of the greater social purpose. Another anecdote is that when we are trying to, is the example of driving cars, right? So car engine efficiency has increased dramatically over the past decade, 2 decades. All right. But studies have shown that overall, all right, while the efficiency has increased, the net gallon of gasoline consumed per mile we drive actually goes up. And the reason for that is that people are starting to drive bigger cars. So we do have more efficient engines that we could use, but we end up defeating this advancement because people are driving larger cars. So water efficiency, but not lose focus of the grander social purpose there. The solution, or rather one of the possible solutions that we all agreed on, was the need for education, for raising the awareness on the value and the price of water. Right now, a lot of this awareness, a lot of this education is crisis-driven, right? There's floods, there's droughts going on, and people tend to get educated. People tend to learn about issues through such crises. Should we be more proactive rather than reactive? So that's pretty much.
Thanks. I'm Bill Becker. I'm with Hazen and Sawyer. I'm our water practice leader, and I'm also an adjunct professor here at Columbia. And our group was also a research needs group, but I kind of focus things more on from a utility perspective, what's needed for municipal water systems, and we didn't spend a whole lot of time on agriculture and other things. And like others, there seems to be a theme here today. Our number one research need, we felt, is determining what the value of water is. And that's not just, people have this perception that it falls freely from the sky, so it shouldn't cost so much. And they maybe understand that you have to pump it out of a river and put it in treatment and bring it to your home. They still don't want to pay a lot. But what doesn't get factored into that often is, we talked earlier today, I think John mentioned there's thousands of main breaks a day throughout the country. Each one of those main breaks has a cost to it. And I don't mean the cost of sending a crew out to fixing that, but there's a business cost to that in a lot of cases. When Toledo was out of water for 2 or 3 days, businesses lost, I don't even know how much, I'm sure millions and millions of dollars in aggregate. And they would much rather have, well, it might make more sense to pay that money up front to prevent something like that from happening just by putting in better treatment. So the value of water, we think, needs a lot of research and an approach to come up with. Communication was the number 2 issue, and again, another theme here, but bring social sciences more into decision-making processes and communicating messages out to the public and to the decision makers at utilities and politicians, really, and how to get people to work together. I take it back. One little part we did talk about agricultural was, and it gets into this communication, is, there's no farmers here today. And maybe in future meetings, it'd be good to get somebody from the agricultural sector. And I know Dan, Pepsi brings some of that because they buy a lot of crops and they have an agricultural focus, but maybe a farmer or two just to kind of get their input on it. The third thing we thought needed research was, what's the best business model for water utilities? Is it the way it is today? Is it full privatization? Is there, in the UK, there's a lot of privatized distribution systems, but municipally owned water systems. And, what's the, do the research and find out which business model really is the most optimal for reliability and costs and all of that. Talked a little about water supply and specifically reuse, and again, not so much from a technology perspective, but more from the barriers to it seem to be acceptability by the public and politicians, and the lack of regulatory standards. EPA doesn't have specific regulations for EPA. I think Chad mentioned this earlier, but so it's left up to the states, and a lot of the states just don't know where to begin on that issue. So that's something that needs some research. And then lastly, the new technologies that may have promise in the future, it's real too early to tell, but things like graphene-based technology might make reliable point-of-use systems or building-scale systems much more economically viable. And so then, instead of treating all this water to, we treat enough water for 100 gallons a person a day, but you only drink a half a gallon of it to very high standards. And as climate change occurs more and more, and there's more extreme weather events throughout the U.S., water supplies in general will be degrading in quality. And you'll see a lot more, especially up here in the Northeast, you'll see a lot of utilities that have to go to advanced treatment, whether that's granular activated carbon or ozone or UV disinfection or something else. They're all they cost a lot, and they're highly energy intensive types of processes to put in. It may be better if you have a small point of use device that's reliable and you can monitor, maybe using big data, have signals sent back so that when it's time to change the device or the filter or do maintenance on it, then crews can go out and take care of that in individual locations. That might be a new model for distribution systems and getting water to customers. And that's pretty much all I could remember anyway.
Okay. So our group was another investor group, and we kind of came at it from a bunch of different areas. So there were some educators, there were people who came at it from the infrastructure side, educational side, academic side. So we had some interesting takes. And I think some of the takes that were interesting were born by the fact that the group wasn't really specialized on water. And so the idea was, okay, we've heard a lot about the capital that needs to go into the industry globally, but what's impeding that arrival? What basic questions? Why isn't that capital being deployed? And at the end of the day, that was, I think, a very fundamental question from an investor perspective is capital seeks a return. And there are lots of returns out there to be where an investor can direct their capital. Why is water that compelling? And I think one of the things is that if the returns are unknown and although the capital needs are quite massive, something has to change. Either the risks of underinvestment are completely mispriced, so therefore people aren't realizing that there is a bigger risk out there of non-investment, or the investment returns are not as attractive as we think they are. And we really sort of focused a lot on the lack of risk understanding. So what happens if we continue as we have to underinvest in infrastructure and water availability, and couldn't we just continue on the way it is? And so that brought up the example of Sao Paulo, which is undergoing a drought, as you all know, and what lessons could be learned from that? And how would we take Sao Paulo from an investment perspective and say, gee, what could we have done differently to counter what they're encountering right now? And unfortunately, that meant you had to act 6, 7, 10 years ago and anticipate problems that were tied to, other diversified water supplies, better water treatment. There was a holistic approach to some of the risks. So that, if you sort of fast forward to our debate, it kind of leads to the conclusion that the risks are mispriced today. So the risk of inaction is completely mispriced. And how does that translate into getting investors to move? Or the other side, is there a shoe that's about to drop that we're going to have a Sao Paulo here in the U.S.? So, interesting questions. I think from an investment perspective, obviously, there is no shortage of capital that will come into this industry. There's a lot of capital that's gone in the energy world. There's a lot of capital that's gone into more basic infrastructure that would die to come into the water industry. What are the obstacles to getting that capital to work? And we think it's a lack of ability to syndicate the political risk. There's a lot of political risk in water investment at the municipal level because in many cases, and I'm speaking about the U.S., is that they're embracing outside capital as a last resort. They're not doing it proactively, they're sort of doing it reactively. And so that poses some issues about how that capital is treated. And then we talked about basically how can you tie economic viability to these water risks and how they have been addressed. So investors need to tie regional viability, state viability, municipal viability to how well those region states or cities have dealt with their infrastructure needs, and start making bigger distinctions between those who've done it right and those who haven't. And once you start getting that kind of momentum, then you'll start seeing more investment, because people will start acting proactively and say, oh, I'm being penalized because industry no longer wants to move to my city, state, region because of XYZ factor. We talked a little bit about water supply versus, water quantity versus water quality, and we agreed, I think, with the group here that in developing countries, the ability to create new systems, which would be less, decentralized, more point of use, probably offers some really interesting economic returns, particularly in increasingly urbanized environments, and that is a model which probably needs some successes in for more capital to come into that sector. And then on the water availability, it's a question of trends, basically visibility on price. What is the price of the water that's being used in agriculture? What are the alternatives? And how do we create systems whereby the allocators of capital are incented to make a decision other than use high-value water on low-value uses? And other than that, we have lots of other ideas, but those are sort of the main points.
Did any group not come up yet? Seems like we have 9 groups. No? Okay, well, thank you. So, don't try let's see if there are questions for this group or the previous group. People are done, right? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So we have Michael Dean, who's hopefully had a chance to reflect, which I don't. There he is, wonderful. I was thinking maybe I should make a joke about you needing a mirror to reflect in, but that's good. So Michael heads the National Association of Water Companies, and I'm very grateful for his support over the last several years in a variety of areas, plus coming here today. So what we'll do is we'll have Michael tell us some of his thoughts based on what he's heard.
Well, it's kind of tough coming up after everyone's done for the day, Manu, but that's okay. So thank you, Manu. Thank you to the Columbia Water Center and the Earth Institute. I'm sure you all join me in appreciating the effort to put into planning this and convening everybody today. Manu just asked me a couple days ago to kind of help him at the end with some concluding thoughts. What he didn't tell me is that I was going to come right after listening to the collective wisdom of a lot of very smart and engaged people here. So I'm certainly not going to try to go back and revisit what we just heard in the discussions, but I will quickly summarize kind of why I believe we're here today, based on what Manu at the beginning in the morning told us, and then a few takeaways as well. So it's been a good day. During one of the breaks, Manu came up to me and said, "Michael, you go to a lot of water meetings," which is what we do in the water business, go to a lot of water meetings. And he goes, "Is this good? Is this valuable? What do you think?" And my immediate response to him was, coming in this morning, I had a gut feeling that it would be, because I looked around, and while I have a lot of really good friends in the industry here, and I'm happy to see them, the majority of people are people that I don't know, which alone tells me that Manu's getting someplace, of bringing together a diverse group of people. And while I think we still have, and I'll reflect on this a little bit, a tendency to talk to ourselves, at least ourselves as a bigger and more diverse group than many of us spend our days with. So Manu, you said to start that you're going to share with us some of the noise that was in your head, I think is how you put it. And maybe it's because you're an engineer, but the noise in your head seems to make a lot more sense than noise I typically feel in my head, because you can then proceed to kind of lay out that noise in a kind of a charge for the day. You said the objective for the day, and I think kind of your vision for America's water is, what are the technological, financial, and legal innovations needed for resilient water systems from city to nation? And you set that in an important context in your slides of economic competition for water, ecological competition for water, climate and drought and flood issues, and of course aging infrastructure. And then you teed up 5 distinct but very interrelated aspects that you called that have significant potential for water risk management. And then finally, you stated that we need appropriate business models to implement better water risk management, to address them, and charged us as participants today with the question, how can we tap the opportunity? Now, after listening to all these great people, and particularly now, even more so, hearing both presenters and audience with all the ideas that they've presented, I'm pleased to tell you, I actually have the answer to your question. But I also am going to tell you that I'm not going to tell you that because that's going to be my business model going forward. So I'll be reaching out to some of you. But I wish it was that simple. But I unfortunately don't have that. We heard lots of very good ideas, and I think that we are moving closer to answering that question and related issues. But even listening to the session here, I think really it comes down, how do we integrate this? Some really good things. But no criticism, because we did a lot of silos. I kind of went from one to the other. There's a little bit of crossover, but it's kind of what we're trying to do with America's Water is partnering science with industry and other elements to move forward. So it really is taking these good ideas and going forward. I agree with many people we've heard today that the solutions exist. I always say this, whether there be technology solutions or engineering solutions or money or even the political will to act, we have it or can develop it. That's relatively, I won't say easy, but there's a path forward for that. But the areas that we fail have all been touched on today as well. And in my mind, they all kind of add up to what I call this broad institutional inertia. It's the inability to move or at least gain any sense of momentum in our institutions of governance. We've heard some great examples. Nancy, are you still here, Nancy Stoner? I love you talk about aging laws as well as aging infrastructure. We can see that both in the environmental side, where I spend a lot of time on finance, infrastructure financing and utility financing, tax policies that were put in place decades ago that made sense then, that are completely inappropriate for the types of things that we're trying to do to achieve sustainable infrastructure in this country. Everybody acknowledges it. I spend my life going to meetings in Washington. Everyone agrees to it, but we can't move forward on it. There's just inertia that we need to overcome. We have inertia in institutions of design and engineering. We heard many examples at Clerico, a passionate speaker about some of that, as well as others in the room. Our institutions of utility management and financing, again, many examples today of that. Our institutions of engagement, Larry Seskin, very thoughtful thoughts about, it's not easy to do, but that we do need to change the way we engage. And that's part of the governance process, but it's also part of that kind of the social contract and how we do business as people involved in water, which is this public trust that we all hold and need to keep in mind. And in our institutions of communications. And at lunch we heard from Carl some very good thoughts on that as well. I'm part of this, I'm not sure who mentioned it, was Carl, the Valley Water Coalition. We've spent a couple of years, many of you in the room are involved as well, really trying to come together and how do we talk as this industry to policymakers, to people in a way that matters and impacts them. Because when you start talking to people, about water, they kind of get it in their guts. Water's important. Yeah, I understand business won't run. My kids will be sick or whatever else. But what's it mean for me? And those of you who gathered in that room up in Columbia University and the water professionals, go take care of it. Do that. We've really got to get them engaged at a more visceral level of the importance of that. So to kind of end here with the communications element and the engagement issue, I was struck by how often we heard, starting at the beginning, we've been talking a lot today about investment, about economic drivers and market solutions. And I think most people in this room are very comfortable with that because we truly believe that those are the things that are going to deliver sustainable solutions going forward. But we're amongst our own here, as I said. And when you're out there, many of the policy people that Manu specifically did not invite in consciousness, and I think that was a good idea. As a policy person, thank you for making exceptions, Manu. It's amongst that world who are often the decision makers, they're very, very uncomfortable looking at water in those terms. It's so uncomfortable that they often don't even get past that to the solutions. And so part of our communications challenge is not backing away from that, because that truly is fundamental to the way that we're going to solve these problems. But how do we communicate that in a way? It is not incompatible with the human right to water and sanitation. I've spent a lot of time with the media, the past Special Rapporteur, Katerina Albuquerque, on these issues, and you can make the case. As a matter of fact, doing these things in an economically sustainable, market-based way often is the best way of ensuring that the least the least advantaged amongst us also receive the benefit of clean water sanitation, not just from a public health standpoint, but from a business for their own local communities and establishing. You heard in the film here, we've got more time to work, and we have more time to work and recreate. We heard both of that because there's clean water, and I think that's very important. So. I also am an optimist, Carl. I don't want to sound at the end. I think that there's a role there, and I'll end with kind of alluding to something that is near and dear to my heart as the director of an association of companies that do public-private partnerships. We've heard it's not moving very fast necessarily. They haven't always been successful, but where they have been, there's one common factor, and that common factor is a leader, often a mayor, who will do what we're trying to do here. He'll look at the challenges, the local challenges of that community. He will look at the technological, the utility, the financing solutions. He will figure out a way to talk to his city council, to his water department, to his citizens about getting through the noise and coming up with the best solution. And so it is about leadership. And Manu, I come away today thinking that just as it takes a local leader, that America's Water has the opportunity to take a national leadership role. And I congratulate you and encourage you, and I think along with many of us in the room, look forward to working with you on that. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Michael. That is amazing that you actually managed to summarize the whole day. I couldn't do it. So I would like to thank all of you now for coming and participating. You probably don't know how academics actually work in the sense of a machine. And so let me explain a bit of that to you. Someone like me wakes up at 4:30, goes to bed at 12, and behaves like a sponge. So you read. And so what you've done for me is, this is my version of crowdsourcing information. And also hypothesis validation and testing, because you come up with a lot of ideas from the readings you do, from the people you interact with, but you don't really know that you know that. The other thing I want to say about academics is that you have a license to be a dreamer as an academic. So it's a particular choice you make in life. You give up other things because you now have the license to work on anything you want, whenever you want, and people can't really question that. And so the role you have is that of asking the what if question. So I mentioned John Young earlier that, as engineers, we are chameleons. As academic engineers, we are worse than that. We actually have no idea. And so in that sense, I would say we are like water. We are completely amorphous. So having said that, I think it's the things that I thought I had been thinking about for some time that come back to reinforce, and there are things that are new that I learned. So I'll quickly reflect a little bit on that. I think the idea that one has to have a structured approach to understanding the different facets that have to be brought together to make progress gets reinforced. And what I heard from Michael's summary, for example, and the group right before that repeatedly, is that the policy levers are important. But if you think about it, policy is not something that exists in a vacuum. It comes from certain pressures that go to those individuals. And those pressures that people kept repeating were mispricing information on things, which then leads to a collapse of a system in terms of fiscal imbalances in the utility system as one example. Okay, we can detail that further out if you want, but I think that got out. It relates to the fact that perhaps we are unprepared for what I call tail probability risk, and this seems to exist in the mining industry. We have a project from the Norwegian bank on looking at water risk in mining. What does that mean? Now I've talked to a lot of the mining stakeholders, mining companies, CEOs, CTOs, all the way down. And the response you get from some of these people, major mining companies, is interesting. Oh, tailing dams failures, that never happens. I've been in this business since Adam was born. And this doesn't happen. Okay, you've had 2 in the last 20 years. Well, actually, sir, you've had 47 in the last 10 years. Oh, well, they don't happen in our enterprises, So floods, they don't happen. So it's the way of thinking of a business that is operating on a time scale which is not consistent with a 1 in a n-year event. And the reason I'm bringing this up was one of the comments I heard was that, okay, if I have to come up with an infrastructure solution to climate change, which is being posed as a 1 in n-year event, I'm sorry, that's not climate change, that's just normal climate, okay? So we can't monetize that, but you know what? That's one of the things that's missing in this industry, which is the interface between the structural and the financial sector solution. You have to, if you can expose that risk, you can actually insure it, and you can come out which path is optimal. The same thing applies to the regulatory enterprise. When we write regulations, and this is why Nancy Stoner's point really resonated with me, if you're writing regulations, what is the action that is going to be triggered by those regulations? And this is something I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about, because there's a fellow called Richard Sandor who was the person who claims to have given birth to water quality trading. And he actually ran the carbon trading desks. And after he sold his company for $1 billion, the carbon trading desk, he was trying to talk to me about, okay, can we do water trading? And I was going, yes, but here's a host of issues. And he said, but I gave birth to water trading. So I was going, okay, so can you now tell me why it hasn't worked? So and there are a number of issues here which, if you look at a particular thing in isolation as an instrument, what I've concluded is it's not going to work because you need the systems view on it. So to get the systems view on it, what you really need to look at is multiple instruments working in conjunction. And so what that means is you have to think about each instrument's breaking points, because otherwise you're not going to see this. So what I think came out of the discussion today was that so-called policy breakages, this refers to identifying where each instrument's breakage point is, because that's what you need to be able to communicate to a person who's experiencing that pressure as a decision maker at the top level. So in summary, I need to let you guys attack the wine and the new foods they have come up with, which is probably not a good thing, because then you'll end up gaining weight and other bad things will happen. But that's long term, right? In the short term, you'll be happier. So what I would like to propose here as a follow-on is what I said in the beginning was I would like to have a working relationship with people. This can be done electronically, this can be done physically, but what we'll try to do, Carl and I and a few others that are willing to volunteer, I'm asking for volunteers, if you can help us put this together as a roadmap document, and I hate doing that, but I think we have no choice. So that roadmap document would kind of lay out the kind of questions Atul was asking Carl. What's your bottom line solution? There isn't one. It's not going to happen. It's not there for energy either, frankly. It's not there for many things. But contextually, this is America's water. This is not generic water. So in America, if we think about it in a disaggregated way or an aggregated way, what are the things we want to work towards as a research enterprise? So I'm emphasizing that because I know a lot of the discussion that happens is about what do we need to do now. I am not interested in that. Having taken the license of a dreamer, I'm looking at 2050 and I'm looking at what's the roadmap to 2050, 2030. I don't care. But something down the way which is exciting, because if I look at the technology innovators, they have a 3-year or 5-year life cycle maybe. Now, one last comment. I keep saying last comment, but this is promised the last one. And the comment is the following, that many people say the water industry is this boring, slow-moving industry, and the same thing for the policy side associated with it and so on. Okay, let's transform it. Okay, so where can we take an example for that? And I've been talking about the information technology industry. This is the computers, this is the software people associated with that. The model they used was very smart. You can talk about Steve Jobs versus Bill Gates beating each other up, but you know what? While they were doing that, they also stimulated university research. This looks like I'm pandering. I'm not. I'm just saying this is the model these people developed. So the model was this. Technologically and implementation-wise, where do you want to be? Let's have these university people who like to talk a lot figure that out and set the standard. And then internally, we are trying to make sure that there's interoperability, there's modularity, that we can actually move something forward. Look at the speed with which that industry actually grew in terms of ideas, which is more important to me as an academic, and in terms of the real world. So if you look at it that way, we can talk about waiting for a crisis. That's not a bad model. We can rush to a crisis, and I hope there are no lawyers here, except one. But we could chase ambulances, so to speak. Or the other thing is we can start thinking about inventing the equivalent of the iPhone for this industry. Both are valid ways to approach it. And I have no preference. I'll chase the ambulance. So with that, let you attack the food and wine. And please socialize and hit on me and tell me why I'm a windbag. Stop there.